The November chill had finally broken, surrendering to the crisp, deceptive warmth of early December. But for Eleanor Vance, the cold had nothing to do with the weather. It was the kind of bone-deep freeze that settles in your chest when you realize the promises you built your life on were nothing but cheap scaffolding, ready to collapse at the first high wind. This year, the high wind wore a tailored suit and the smug, condescending smile of Robert Stirling, CEO of Stirling Capital, a man who believed the financial market was simply an extension of his own personal ego. Eleanor had been Stirling Capital's head of operations for 5 arduous years. 5 years spent running the company's daily life, smoothing the rough edges of Robert's reckless ambition, and ensuring the machinery kept turning while he took all the credit. She was the invisible engine, reliable, tireless, and, crucially, unseen. That invisibility, which she had so carefully cultivated for half a decade, was about to be her greatest weapon. But first, she had to endure the humiliation. It was Tuesday, 2 weeks before the annual Stirling Capital Christmas Gala, the most anticipated and certainly the most expensive event on the company calendar. Robert Stirling, flanked by his 2 most sycophantic lieutenants, Derek, who handled acquisitions with the moral clarity of a swamp creature, and Stephanie, whose only recognized skill was laughing precisely 1 beat after Robert's terrible jokes, had summoned Eleanor to his office. The office itself was a testament to Robert's lack of originality. Polished mahogany, abstract art that cost more than Eleanor's annual salary, and a panoramic view of the city skyline, all framed by the polished steel of the building they currently occupied. "Eleanor," Robert began, not bothering to offer a seat, forcing her to stand before his massive, imposing desk. His voice was smooth, edged with the false empathy of a predator offering a wounded animal a quick end. "Thank you for coming in. Please, don't look so tense. It's December. We should all be feeling the festive spirit." Eleanor felt anything but festive. She felt a knot tightening in her stomach, a familiar premonition that always preceded one of Robert's calculated cruelties. She had learned to remain impassive. "Robert," she replied, her voice steady, neutral. "Is there an update on the Q4 projections I need to review?" Robert leaned back, steepling his fingers, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. He was savoring this. "No, Eleanor, no projections. This is a personnel matter. Specifically, your personnel matter." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy, savoring the small, controlled flinch he saw in her eyes. "Let's be frank. While you have been adequate in your role, Stirling Capital is moving in a new direction. A direction that requires a different kind of vision, more aggressive, more Robert Stirling." Derek and Stephanie offered obligatory, shallow nods of agreement, like backup dancers in a bad performance. "I'm afraid, Eleanor, effective immediately, we are accepting your resignation." The cold hit her then, sharp and immediate. She had seen this coming, of course. Robert always purged those who knew too much or who threatened to outshine him before the grand spectacles, like the Christmas party, where he wanted to be the sole, dazzling sun. But hearing the words, delivered with such callous disregard for her 5 years of loyalty and effort, still stung. "Resignation?" Eleanor repeated, her voice betraying nothing but a cool inquiry. "I don't recall submitting one, Robert." He chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "Details? Details. Let's call it a mutually agreed-upon severance. Don't worry, we'll be generous. 2 weeks' pay, plus whatever vacation time you haven't taken. You'll be packed up and escorted out by the end of the day. And just so there's no misunderstanding," he added, his tone hardening, the facade of false kindness finally dropping, "your presence at the Christmas Gala is, naturally, rescinded. We wouldn't want a disruption, especially not with the key investors present." This was the core of the humiliation. Not just the firing, but the public erasure. The Christmas Gala wasn't just a party. It was the social culmination of the year, the place where power was demonstrated and connections were solidified. To be barred was to be publicly declared irrelevant. So, you're terminating me 2 weeks before Christmas, after I finalize the venue and vendor contracts for your spectacular gala, and you are doing it on the flimsiest of pretexts? Eleanor asked, still dangerously calm. Robert shrugged, a gesture of absolute power. Think of it as an early, necessary gift to the company. Derek will take over your duties, effective immediately. And thank you, Eleanor. We appreciate your efforts. Truly. He gestured toward the door, a definitive dismissal. Security will be up shortly. Eleanor looked at the three of them: Robert, the arrogant architect of her downfall; Derek, the eager replacement, already measuring the curtains; and Stephanie, who couldn't meet her eyes, terrified of catching the contagion of failure. This was the moment of complete, unadulterated public within the company defeat. She allowed herself a small, internal acknowledgement of the pain, the injustice, and then she let the cold fire of calculation take over. "Understood, Robert," she said simply. She turned and walked out, her back straight, her stride measured. She didn't look back at the polished mahogany or the panoramic view. She didn't need to. She knew every inch of that view. She sat in her apartment that evening, surrounded by boxes. The severance was official, the ID badge already deactivated, watching the early December snow fall outside. The humiliation was a raw wound. She hadn't shed a tear. Tears were a weakness Robert Stirling understood. What he didn't understand, what he couldn't possibly fathom, was that Eleanor Vance was not just an employee. She was not just the head of operations. 5 years ago, Eleanor's estranged but fiercely wealthy and meticulous grandfather, a real estate mogul with a penchant for anonymity, had passed away, leaving her a complex, multi-layered portfolio of properties. One property, disguised within a labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore trusts, was the massive Class A office tower at One City Plaza, the very building housing Stirling Capital's opulent headquarters. Robert Stirling paid rent to a faceless corporation, Vance Holdings LLC, not realizing the company's only principal was the woman he had just casually discarded. The irony was exquisite. The humiliation he had inflicted, the firing, the severance, the rescinded invitation to the gala, had all been conducted within her walls. The Christmas Gala was scheduled for December 23rd, in the tower's grand ballroom, a space Robert had crowed about securing, claiming it proved Stirling Capital's prestige. Eleanor opened a sleek, encrypted laptop. She wasn't just packing boxes. She was gathering the paperwork for a quiet, formal eviction process. But a formal process was too dull. Robert had opted for humiliation. She would respond with spectacle. The eviction notice was already drafted, but she needed to deliver it at the right time, in the right place, for maximum retention and maximum vengeance. She spent the next week meticulously building her case, not against Robert's business decisions, but against Robert's very right to occupy the physical space of his success. The complex lease agreement he signed, the one Eleanor herself had quietly reviewed and approved years ago through her legal team, ensured that a single clear breach of contract could initiate an immediate, non-negotiable termination of tenancy. She needed a legitimate breach. Robert, in his arrogance, had provided several, including a recent unauthorized sublet of a storage floor to a personal friend, a clear violation of Clause 14b. Eleanor smiled for the first time since the termination. The humiliation was his opening act. Her performance was about to begin. The Christmas Gala was still on, but Robert Stirling would soon learn that sometimes the greatest power is not the title you hold, but the property you own. The clock was ticking towards December 23rd. The stage was set. The days crawled forward, each one tightening the spring of tension within Eleanor. Robert Stirling, blinded by his own sense of untouchable success, continued his preparations for the Christmas Gala, unaware that every email he sent regarding floral arrangements or the open bar service was being routed through a server rack situated in the basement of the very building Eleanor owned. He was planning his triumph on her land. Eleanor, meanwhile, was officially persona non grata. She kept a low profile, working from a high-end, anonymous co-working space just blocks away. She didn't seek out new employment. She didn't update her resume. Her focus was entirely on timing and execution. Vengeance, like good investment, required patience and precision. She received a series of emails from Stephanie, the former colleague who had averted her gaze during the firing, forwarded through an old, shared personal channel. Stephanie wasn't malicious. She was just intensely ambitious and tragically weak. The emails detailed the escalating drama inside Stirling Capital without Eleanor. Derek, her replacement, was drowning, a victim of his own incompetence and Robert's unrealistic demands. Schedules were slipping, vendor payments were confusing, and the gala budget was spiraling out of control. The machine Eleanor had perfected was sputtering. But Robert didn't care about efficiency. He cared about appearances. And the appearance he was most keen on maintaining was the narrative of Eleanor's inadequacy. A particularly vicious email arrived on the Monday before the party. It wasn't from Robert, but from HR, and it was forwarded to Eleanor by her lawyer, who was patiently holding the eviction papers. The email outlined a final damning assessment of Eleanor's performance, deliberately falsified to imply gross negligence in Q3. It was boilerplate, designed to justify the immediate firing and, more importantly, to ensure she could never successfully sue for wrongful termination. A pattern of substandard oversight leading directly to the recent operational slippages now being corrected by Mr. Derek Finch. Eleanor read the line, her fingers tightening around her phone. They were rewriting history to make her the villain, publicly assassinating her professional reputation as a parting shot. They were trying to poison the well, making sure that even if she moved on, the stink of failure would follow her. This was no longer just about the money or the title. This was about justice. The humiliation was not complete until the lie was eradicated. She used her remaining access, a forgotten back-end admin password she'd created years ago for emergency systems access, to remotely check the building security logs for One City Plaza. She saw Robert Stirling coming and going, always with an air of immense self-importance, often leaving late, always forgetting to turn off the expensive lighting in his corner office. She monitored the contractors setting up the grand ballroom, watched them stringing up the expensive, glittering Christmas lights and dragging in the massive, perfectly shaped pine tree. She felt like a ghost, haunting her own domain, watching the tenants prepare for a party she was officially banned from. The emotional low point came 2 days before the gala. She received a text message from an old industry rival, Michael, who was clearly fishing for details, cloaked in fake sympathy. Heard about Stirling. Rough timing, especially right before the holidays. Robert's talking about trimming the fat to everyone. Seems he's making you the example. Keep your chin up. The phrase, trimming the fat, a disgusting, dehumanizing corporate euphemism, burned in her mind. He wasn't just firing her. He was actively leveraging her failure as a motivational tool for the survivors. He was feeding her to the wolves to make himself look like a strong, decisive leader. Eleanor closed the laptop, walked to the window, and stared at the imposing outline of One City Plaza, dominating the skyline like a monument to corporate power. It was her monument. She had allowed Robert to rent space in it, to throw parties in it, to feel powerful within it. It was time to reclaim the tenancy. She finally met with her lead counsel, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman named Ms. Davies, on the afternoon of December 22nd. "Eleanor," Ms. Davies said, sliding the thick stack of eviction documents across the polished table. The papers are ready. We have the proof of the lease violation, Clause 14B, the unauthorized sublet of the storage floor. It's airtight. We also have the title deeds, the Vance Holdings LLC registration, and all the required legal notices. Eleanor picked up the documents. They felt weighty, like destiny. And the eviction, Ms. Davies? How fast can we execute this? The lease clearly states that a confirmed breach of this magnitude allows the lessor, that's you, Eleanor, to issue a notice of immediate termination and vacate. Given the timing and the nature of the breach, Robert Stirling will have precisely 2 hours from the moment the notice is served to cease all operations and begin vacating the premises. If he resists, the building security, your security, Eleanor, will become involved, and the locks will be changed. And when is the optimal moment? Eleanor asked, a cold, predatory smile finally touching her lips. The Christmas Gala, December 23rd, 9:30 p.m. The moment he is at his peak of self-congratulation. All the key investors, the major clients, the entire industry press, they will all be present. The ultimate inversion of power happens when the fall is witnessed by the largest possible audience. Eleanor nodded, satisfied. She had already secured the required security personnel, a separate, discreet, and highly professional team that reported only to her legal entities, not the internal building staff Robert thought he controlled. The next day, December 23rd, Eleanor dressed not in the typical dark power suits she wore as head of operations, but in a dress that shimmered with the dangerous luminescence of black ice. It was a statement piece, subtle but undeniable, purchased with the intention of making a quiet, impactful entry. Her hair, usually constrained in a severe knot, was styled in soft, cascading waves. She was not attending the gala as a former employee. She was not attending as a guest. She was attending as the ultimate unseen authority. She arrived at One City Plaza at 9 p.m., bypassing the main lobby where Robert Stirling was currently basking in the light of flash photography. She used a private freight elevator that led directly to the building management offices. The offices Robert believed were run by an impersonal corporation in Delaware. She met Ms. Davies and the 2 security team leads in the quiet, empty control room. On the closed-circuit monitors, the grand ballroom was a vision of sparkling, opulent success. Robert, standing beneath the colossal Christmas tree, was making his annual self-aggrandizing speech, champagne flute raised, his face flushed with triumph. And to the future of Stirling Capital, Robert's voice echoed faintly through the intercom. We have trimmed the fat, we have sharpened our focus, and we have proven once again that we are the only force that truly matters in this city. The timing was perfect. Eleanor glanced at Ms. Davies, whose expression was grimly expectant. The contract, the evidence, the eviction notice, all bundled neatly in a red leather folder that looked deceptively like a Christmas gift. The humiliation was about to transition into retribution. The stage was set for the final, catastrophic revelation. The grand ballroom, suspended high above the city, was a glittering cage of Robert Stirling's making. The sound of applause for his self-serving toast had barely faded when Eleanor Vance, accompanied by Ms. Davies and 2 large, silent men in dark suits, made her entrance. She didn't use the main doors. She utilized the secondary service entrance, typically reserved for catering staff and maintenance. She walked onto the polished granite floor, her black ice dress catching the thousands of twinkling Christmas lights that adorned the massive central pine. The noise of the party, the clinking of glasses, the forced laughter, the low, pulsing music seemed to die a sudden, violent death around her as she moved. Robert, still holding his champagne flute and basking in the adoration of his investors, was the first to notice her. His smile, moments ago a picture of confident success, evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, sputtering disbelief. "Eleanor? What in God's name are you doing here?" His voice, usually booming with authority, cracked slightly. a dissonant note in the festive symphony. The attention shifted instantly. Every head in the room, investors, clients, rivals, and the terrified junior staff, turned to Eleanor. They saw the fat that had been trimmed, the dismissed operational head, the woman who was supposed to be irrelevant. Eleanor stopped 20 feet from Robert. The silence in the enormous hall now so absolute that the hum of the air conditioning was deafening. "Robert," she said, her voice quiet, precise, amplified by the natural acoustics of the space and the sudden, rapt attention of 300 people. It was the calm voice of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "I believe I wasn't clear when I accepted your mutually agreed-upon severance. I did not actually resign." Robert recovered quickly, his corporate arrogance returning like a shield. "Security! Get this woman out of here! She is trespassing!" "She was terminated last week." He gestured wildly towards the entrance, but the usual building security guards were nowhere in sight. They were in the control room, quietly taking new orders. The two men who stood behind Eleanor, not bodyguards, but the chief officers of an independent, highly specialized security firm, took one deliberate step forward, projecting a quiet, unshakable authority that froze everyone in place. "This is ridiculous, Eleanor," Robert hissed, stepping toward her, his face dark with fury. "You've made a scene. Enjoy your 2 weeks' pay and get out before I call the police." Eleanor held up the red leather folder. "It wasn't a gift, it was a judgment. You are, of course, correct that I was terminated, Robert, and for that, I am grateful. It freed up my schedule for more pressing matters, such as managing my investments." She paused, letting the word investments hang in the air, allowing the audience to assume she meant stocks or bonds. Then, Ms. Davies stepped forward, her voice cutting through the thick tension. "Mr. Stirling, my name is Helena Davies. I represent Vance Holdings LLC, the sole ownership entity of One City Plaza." A ripple of confusion went through the room. Vance Holdings was a familiar name on official documents, the anonymous, powerful landlord that everyone assumed was a pension fund or a distant offshore conglomerate. Robert looked from the folder in Eleanor's hand to Ms. Davies, a flicker of pure terror crossing his eyes. "What does this have to do with anything? We pay our rent, Ms. Davies. This is a private employee matter." "It has everything to do with it, Robert," Eleanor corrected, her voice now carrying the weight of ultimate authority. "Because, you see, Vance Holdings LLC is not a pension fund. It is not an offshore conglomerate. It is me." He finally looked him directly in the eye, and the power dynamic shattered entirely. The head of operations, the fat he had trimmed, the woman he had publicly humiliated, was, in fact, his landlord. The silence this time was truly absolute. The hundreds of guests were statues of shock. They were standing in her building, drinking her champagne, applauding her tenant, Robert Stirling. "That's impossible," Robert stammered, visibly sweating beneath the expensive lighting. "That corporation is registered in the Caymans. It's been owned by a holding trust for decades." "It was," Eleanor confirmed smoothly, "until my grandfather passed 5 years ago. He was a man who valued efficiency and, perhaps, enjoyed a long, elaborate joke. He left the title deeds to me, hidden behind 3 layers of shell companies. Companies whose maintenance and legal filings I, as your head of operations, was perfectly positioned to oversee without attracting undue notice." She gave a chilling small smile. "It was the most efficient way to pay the rent, wouldn't you say?" She stepped closer, forcing Robert to retreat one step, bringing him right up to the base of the massive, beautiful Christmas tree he had paid for. "And speaking of rent, Robert, I also have evidence here, signed, dated, and notarized, of your recent, unauthorized sublet of the storage floor on the 14th floor to your friend, Mr. Arthur Jenkins, for personal use. That is a flagrant violation of Clause 14B of the Stirling Capital Tenancy Agreement." Ms. Davies opened the red folder and placed a document on a nearby table, heavy and final. Pursuant to the terms of the lease agreement, Mr. Stirling, a single documented breach of this magnitude grants the lessor the right to issue a notice of immediate termination and vacate, which we are doing now. The silence was broken only by the sharp, clear voice of Ms. Davies. Robert Stirling, as of 9:35 p.m. on December 23, 2025, Stirling Capital's lease at One City Plaza is officially terminated. You have 2 hours to cease all operations and begin the process of vacating the premises. Failure to comply will result in your being physically removed for trespassing on private property. Robert's face was a mask of catastrophic defeat, his entire carefully constructed empire crumbling around him. The humiliation was now his, televised in the most public way possible, right beneath the festive boughs of the Christmas tree. I own the furniture. I own the lights. You can't just, he pleaded, desperation replacing fury. We will inventory the assets, Eleanor said, delivering the final icy blow. But tonight, Robert, you don't even own the air you're breathing. The party is over. You are no longer welcome on my property. She looked out at the silent, stunned crowd, the key investors who were now exchanging calculating glances, the rivals who were barely suppressing glee, and the terrified employees of Stirling Capital. As the owner of this building, Eleanor announced, her voice ringing with the newly claimed authority, I apologize for the sudden disruption. The remainder of the Christmas Gala will continue. The bar is still open. However, Robert Stirling and his associates are no longer considered tenants or guests. They are trespassers. I recommend you all enjoy the rest of your evening and perhaps, she concluded, her eyes lingering on the defeated Robert, consider who you choose to partner with in the new year. The two security chiefs stepped forward. They didn't touch Robert. They simply stood, immovable, waiting. Robert Stirling, the great CEO, had been reduced to a humiliated, evicted party guest on Christmas Eve. He dropped his champagne flute. It didn't shatter. It bounced harmlessly on the thick carpet. He turned, defeated, and was led away through the service entrance, his footsteps echoing the hollow sound of his destroyed reputation. The power had inverted. The victim had triumphed, and the vengeance was complete, timed perfectly for the season of reckoning.